When you think of legacy and how you hope to have left your mark on this world, what comes to mind?
One of the themes that I've focused on in my life is the 2 great commandments. And I think everything that I want my children and grandchildren to understand comes from those 2 commandments. Loving God, and by that I mean being obedient to his commandments, learning as much as we can about him and our Savior Jesus Christ through the scriptures, through modern day prophets. I think also serving in the church is a branch between both of those 2 great commandments, because we serve because we love God, but we also serve because we love our neighbor.
Hello and welcome. I'm Caleb and this is Dad.
Hello.
Recently I've been having this idea of wanting to record my grandpa, he is a retired pediatrician, my dad practicing OBGYN, and then myself, I'm in my medical training at the University of Washington. And kind of recording some experiences in medicine, how they relate to spirituality. So I'll just kind of give a little introductory bio. So this is Dr. John Weston Allred, known affectionately by me as Dad. Yep. Dr. Allred attended medical school at Wayne State, class of 1998, and completed residency training in obstetrics and gynecology at William Beaumont Hospital. He practiced medicine in Rexburg for 21 years. He served a mission in Hartford, Connecticut, served as bishop, now serving in the stake presidency for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Married to my amazing mother, Nanette Allred, and they have 3 children, Hannah, myself, and Grace, and 2 grandchildren, William and Eleanor. Dad, thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Yeah, so, initially this project started out as wanting to document experiences in medicine as they relate to spirituality, and we're going to discuss a lot of those themes, but priorities have shifted in recent days, and
right.
We really want to use this time more as a tribute to your legacy and your life experiences, given that we recently found some new information out about your health. Would you mind just kind of letting us know what's going on there?
So, I started getting really fatigued probably about a year and a half ago, which is not typical for me.
Yeah.
And then over the years, or over the last several months, I've been losing a lot of weight, losing function in my hands. And so I've gone through lots of testing, spent a lot of time in MRI machines, and ultimately they came up with the diagnosis of ALS, which is a neuromuscular wasting disorder, and there's no cure. So there it is.
There it is.
The most unfortunate diagnosis.
So, yeah, that's kind of where we're at. It's absolutely terrible. But, given everything, I can guarantee as we're chatting, I'm probably going to cry, and I'm okay with that, because there's just a lot of raw emotion and feeling with everything going on.
Yeah, Mom and I have been crying daily since we found out.
Yeah. I've been really worried about your health for a while. We've been discussing things back and forth, and, as time has passed, I started to get more worried, and, this is a, very spiritual thing for me. An experience, and I'm not going to go into details because it's a sacred thing for me, but I remember a couple days before you got your diagnosis, I was taking care of a gentleman at St. Alphonsus Hospital who was having some very serious health conditions, and I came back and I was sitting in that resident room by myself, and I was just really thinking about your situation, and I had this peace come over me, a peace that can only make sense for those that have kind of experienced some sort of spiritual peace.
Right.
And we didn't know the diagnosis at that point, but for lack of better words, I was okay. Then when we ultimately got the phone call from you a couple days later, devastation set in. And the first thing I did after that, when I got the news, is I left work and I just came home to give you and Mom a hug.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted
and
to do.
It was a good visit. It really helped us kind of navigate through that first 48, 72 hours.
Yeah. The quote I keep telling people when they ask how I feel is, spiritually I'm at peace, but it hurts like hell.
Yeah.
And it does.
So that's the common theme here at our house too.
Yeah. To me, you have always been an amazing mentor and father. And it's funny how even in these difficult times, you're the person helping get me through, whether that's with how you feel now or wisdom that you shared with me in the past. I wanted to share this book. So this is a book my dad gave me just before I got married. And it's called What Do You Do With a Problem? Dad knows me, and he knows I stress over problems.
And that's an inherited trait.
Yeah, so maybe some wisdom that you're just passing forward. But it's a children's story about a little boy who is going through a problem, and he worries and worries and worries, and then ultimately comes to find the joy that can come through problems. And we all know that, yes, of course, people say good things come out of difficult things. And quite frankly, that can just make me angry right now, I'll be honest, because we all know that's going to happen. That, we'll learn a lot from this time. But there's one part in this story that I texted to you a couple days before we got the ultimate diagnosis. And one of the questions this boy asks in this book, he says, what if my problem takes away all of my things? Mm-hmm. And with the reality of this scenario, there's a lot that's being taken away, but your own words of wisdom that you wrote to me in this book next to the text, I thought were really relevant. You said, don't fret over the things in life that can be taken away. Be grateful for those things that have been given that can never be taken away. This is the gift and the idea of recompense and leaving our loving mark in the world. Love, Dad. And I hope that in this time that we spend talking about your life, we can explore the loving mark that you have left on the world, specifically also the loving mark that you've left in me that will carry on with future generations. Right. My children will grow up learning lessons about Grandpa John and what you taught me. So would you mind just sharing your thoughts about what this text meant when you were writing that to me, and then also kind of how it relates to what we're going through?
So, when you look at the things that can't be taken away, I mean, your relationships, your love of the gospel, your understanding of the gospel, and then you turn around and look at the things that can be taken away, all your stuff, and then your life ultimately will have to be sacrificed. My thought is looking at that sacrifice as a consecrated experience that you're giving back to God, where you approach it with open arms, open hands, and a willing sacrifice. Throughout all of the scriptures, we read about sacrifices being given. Most of them have been given in honor to our Heavenly Father, and that's what we strive to do, rather than facing the sacrifice with clenched fists and jealousy or anger.
Yeah.
So, but
I can't lie, I've had some clenched fists myself, but it's like we've chatted about, you have one of two options when you're faced with a difficult scenario like this: turn to God or turn away from him.
Right.
And, one thing I've come to learn is it's okay to still be angry, but trust God. It's not an anger at God per se. It's an anger with the situation, but fully trusting and having faith in him. Yeah,
I think that's key, because whenever there's something going on like this, I think it's an opportunity to learn a lesson. And sometimes it's not pretty when it comes to learning lessons. And so we do our best to navigate through. And there will be times where you are angry.
Yeah.
I know Mom and I have been.
Yeah.
but we're trying to learn the lesson that this is giving.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful for your example through all this. And as we, moving forward, as we discuss a little bit about the Savior and his role as a healer, I kind of wanted to open up dialogue talking about one of my favorite scriptural stories involving healing. And I'll just pull this up. This is the story of the woman with the issue of blood. And we'll be looking through some scriptures, Luke 8, starting with verse 43. And to just give some context, it opens up by talking about this woman. It says, a woman having an issue of blood, this is verse 43, of 12 years, had spent all of her living on physicians. Neither could be healed of any.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I love this scripture so much. And being somebody going into medicine, wanting to heal people, I think there's a certain element of understanding that medicine can't do it all.
Right.
God has given us some great resources to be able to help people, and some things can be healed, but like ALS, there's some things that just can't. And this woman had given her whole livelihood to try and figure this out, and doctors couldn't do it.
Right.
We read on, it says, she came behind him and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her issue of blood was stanched. And Jesus said, who touched me? When all denied, Peter and they that were with him said, Master, there's a lot of people walking around us. A lot of people have touched you. And Christ said, no. It's not that somebody's touched me, but it's that somebody has touched me in a spiritual sense, and he felt virtue go out of him.
Right. And
then the woman kind of owned up to what happened, and she came trembling in fear and fell down before him, saying, hey, it was me that touched you, and I was immediately healed. And then Christ goes on to teach a lesson that by faith we can be made whole.
Yeah.
Now, the brutal reality of life is sometimes that faith heals us in a literal sense where her issue of blood was resolved. Sometimes it's in a more spiritual sense where God needs us to go through a specific trial, and maybe that is a health trial, but he can heal us in a spiritual sense.
Yeah.
Curious to get your insights on this.
So that's always been one of my favorite stories as well. And I do have questions about the mechanism of that healing.
Obviously.
Because I'd do a lot less surgery if we could do that. Although surgery is really fun, but still, I find that story very interesting because it's in a background. There's a background story going on. The reason Jesus was going that way is the leader of the synagogue, Jairus, needed him to come and heal his daughter. And as Jesus went, essentially life got in the way.
Oh, yeah.
Crowds of people, someone else that needed him. And in the process of heading to the synagogue, one of his servants came and said, it's too late. Your daughter is dead.
Yeah.
And whether that's death in a physical sense, which was the case here, or even in a spiritual sense, I think everybody goes through a level of spiritual death, and we all feel that loss. But as a father and as a husband, there are many situations where you feel that huge loss, a loss that you probably feel like you can't get back.
Yeah.
And Jesus, I can picture him putting his arm around Jairus, and then he says in verse 50, "Fear not, believe only, and she shall be made whole." And I really believe that that's what Christ's healing is meant for, to help us be whole.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's what we want. But he knows how to heal us and to bring us the peace that we need. whether or not it's exactly what we would like. I would love to be healed of this.
Yeah.
And go back to work, but it's not going to happen, most likely.
Yeah.
So.
But still, you find a way to get that spiritual strength that only he can offer. I mean, I can't even make sense of it myself because, don't get me wrong, I'm extremely angry. I have been going through this phase of just being mad that you won't have those later in life experiences where you've worked all this time, then you should be enjoying retirement, go travel the world. Not that you haven't, you've traveled a lot, but then also getting to help raise my kids, you know, being grandpa. Right. And I'm frustrated that role has been so short for you. So given all of that's being taken away, I can't make sense of it, how spiritually we're okay, but we are. So anyway, it's something that's hard to verbalize in words, but when you have that testimony and receive that spiritual peace from him, it just is. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that I've been teaching throughout the stake is this concept of putting on the armor of God. It's one of the things that my patriarchal blessing recommends that I do every single day. And with that armor, it allows you to defend yourself from Satan's fiery darts. And we're not perfect at it. The shield of faith says it will protect you from all the darts, but I don't believe that's true necessarily because I've had some get through. Yeah. And they hurt. But I think taking all those principles from the armor of God, you can keep retooling your armor to be more fit. And that's what situations like this cause in our lives, is that opportunity to step back and say, okay, I thought I'd learned most of the lessons that I needed. Yeah. But here's a new one.
I love that imagery, though. Like, it's not that somebody comes and fixes your armor. You're taking the tools and equipment needed to fix it and doing that for yourself. And God might give you some guidance, say, okay, this is the tool you're going to use, and this is how you can do it. But you have to put in the work to be okay. And that's frustrating in and of itself sometimes. Right. But you know, you've always been an example to me of that. If you make a mistake, if you get hurt because of something you did incorrectly, you have the amazing power of repentance to fix it and to come back stronger. And then maybe the next time you say, okay, my armor needs this adjustment, and that's not going to hurt me next time.
And my armor has never been perfect. Right. My armor is still in development. And my parents initially fitted me with that armor and our home growing up. But then we have to take charge of our own armor, if that makes sense, and be responsible for it. And then, you know, including someone else in that equation, like when we're sealed in the temple and married, mom has been a huge factor in my armor being stronger. Yeah. That makes sense.
It does. And I think that's a good transition point into exploring a little bit about your childhood. What was it like growing up in the June and Gerald Allred household? Right. Grandpa being a military physician, was that kind of before or after you were born, moving around a bunch? Tell me a little bit about what it was like being the eldest son in that household. Just any of your thoughts.
So I went through a little exercise on memory a while back. I had my mom give me every address that we'd lived at during the military. And I remember living in an apartment in Salt Lake where our dog was hit by a car. And so I remember that very vividly. And then, you know, we moved around a lot. And I just remember just having a really happy home life. I mean, my parents were more military than Mom's parents are. Mom's parents were more hippie style. My parents were more military style. So when they said jump, I was already in the air. Just had to know how high.
Okay.
So it was good home life, though. They taught me a lot. And I do remember a lot of different things about where we lived, what was going on. And my father really didn't seem to be gone that much, even though he was in residency and doing his physician training. I just remember him being there with my mom. I know he wasn't there all the time, but I do remember some key moments in my childhood. And my parents were very good at teaching what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that helped me establish a foundation of wanting to be obedient all the time. I remember things like in preschool in Victorville, California, we would always go get a treat right afterwards. I remember my brother Ben and I throwing crab apples from the top of a tree, which is not a good idea because when you connect with a car,
might be some legal consequences there.
You're in trouble. We hit one of the general's cars, and he stopped his car, and we got in a bit of trouble. But
boys will be boys.
Oh, yeah. But, growing up in the military was a good experience for me. He eventually got out of the military, and we settled in Bountiful, Utah.
Okay.
Which is where they still are. But I moved around a lot until I was in junior high.
Yeah. Taking it back a little bit to this feeling of Dad was busy life-wise, but he was ever present. That's something that I have felt a lot too. So growing up in Rexburg and people are like, oh, what does your dad do? Oh, he's an OBGYN. The number one comment I always got was he must be really busy all the time. Which, it's not that you weren't busy, and I think I've only come to really define what this means for me since having my own children, but I like to call it intentional fatherhood.
Yeah.
Some days you have 5 minutes. Other days you have 12 hours.
Yeah.
Right? It's not so much, and of course, quality time is important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not discounting that. But like we were talking about with studying the gospel in the morning with intent, when it comes to William and Eleanor, if I'm going to be gone all the day, I'll wake up in the morning and say, okay, though I don't have a lot of time today, William and I are going to do a Lego set when I get home, and Ella and I are going to hold hands and walk to get the mail together.
Right.
Because we're going to create a memory.
Yeah.
And that's something that you embodied, and it's great to see that you saw that in your own father. And that's the beauty of growing up and maturing, is that you come to kind of understand and define things for yourself. And so thank you for being an example of intentional fatherhood.
Yeah, that was something that I witnessed from my father.
Yeah.
And then my mother was always home. Whenever she made it a point to make sure she was home when we got home from school.
Yeah.
And so she was always there. So I had that support on both ends.
Yeah.
And it made it really nice.
Oh, that's great. Tell me a little bit about, every sibling has their own role. I'm the middle child.
Yeah.
William being my oldest, I kind of see him as a leader of the group. Tell me what it meant to you to be an older sibling, and not that these memories and experiences have to necessarily be from your childhood, but what does it mean to you to be the eldest sibling, and how did you kind of approach that role?
Well, one of the things that my patriarchal blessing says is that as the eldest, I have the opportunity to kind of, in a way, show the way to my younger siblings. And I took that role seriously. I mean, I wasn't always the kindest older brother.
Sure.
Just because there were some days I just wanted my own way.
And we're not all perfect.
Yeah. But I think throughout my time at home, I created a really good bond with all of my siblings, especially my brother Ben, because it was just the two of us.
Yeah, you really
most of the time moving around. But it's been nice because subsequently I've developed really good relationships with all my siblings. And it's been fantastic to be able to do that. And I really did enjoy the opportunity to be the oldest. I think my personality type was more that way.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful experience in our family.
Yeah.
So I do think my parents were excited to see me go away to school. But, sometimes a personality like mine, you need some space from it, especially when I was younger.
Sure. Well, yeah, I have really benefited from your relationships with your siblings in having mentors and people to guide me and people to love me. So I'm really grateful for that. Briefly, while we're on the topic of your childhood, not that we have to go into each and everything, but briefly tell me, what were you into when you were a kid? Where did you invest your time?
Outside.
Yeah?
Yeah, my brother Ben and I grew up in the generation where as soon as you got home from school, you went back outside. So we spent a ton of time outside, getting into a little bit of trouble, but
I remember something about creating a guillotine for grasshoppers.
Yeah. So we lived next to a vacant lot. My father gave us a penny for every grasshopper we killed. So Ben was more creative than I was. I just got a gallon jug and put as many grasshoppers as I could in there and then filled it up with water and drowned them. But Ben created a guillotine where he got a X-Acto knife hooked to a rubber band, pulled it and set it, and he had little head places for each of the grasshoppers to go in. I think it was 5 at a time.
Oh my.
So he stuck them in there and then he'd pull the little pin out and it would cut off all their heads.
Well, I think
you just see them fall.
When your time ultimately comes to leave this life, you might have a couple hundred grasshoppers that you'll need to answer for before you make it through the pearly gates.
But they're locusts.
Oh, yeah.
They're pests, even to
it's permissible. Okay, it's permissible.
Yeah, they're going to be in hell.
That makes sense. And then soccer, right? That's kind of something you got into early.
Yeah, I scored my first goal in 4th grade.
And then that feeling just never left you, I'm sure. I know it
well. I was on the playground. I was really short back then, but one of my friends got me onto one of the teams.
Okay.
And I remember scoring and just loving it. So I got into soccer in Washington.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience. I mean, our first season, we lost every single game. But then as time went on, we got a lot better. And before we moved back to Utah, I was actually invited to try out for the Washington State Select team when I was only in 6th grade. Yeah. But they had things really well established in Washington. So, but yeah, we had to move.
Yep. Well, and I loved growing up and seeing all your trophies, your jerseys. Right. Ultimately won a couple state championships and was known to the fans as Johnny Rocket. Yeah. Is that right?
That was my nickname.
Yep.
Yeah, that's... I had... My dominant foot was my right foot. Okay. But when I was a junior in high school, I wanted my left foot to be just as powerful. Yeah. So I would go out into our backyard. We had the soccer field right next to our house in Bountiful. And I would shoot 200 times with my left foot just to get it trained. And eventually it got to the point where I could go either direction.
And as somebody who
made me happy.
until your foot got injured in more recent years. But, even when I was growing up in high school, we'd play on the same indoor soccer team together.
Yeah.
That's a formidable shot to face.
Yeah.
You had quite the rocket. It's an accurate nickname. So
that was a fun time of life.
Great. Well, any other thoughts on your childhood that you'd like to document or share before we transition to maybe a little bit more about your personal development of your testimony?
I think the biggest thing from my childhood is that my parents created a lot of traditions in our home that really helped establish our family, if that makes sense.
Briefly, what were a couple of those?
So, Christmas pajamas the night before.
Yeah.
We always had Sunday dinner.
Okay.
And that still goes on today.
Yeah.
Dancing to Stayin' Alive Christmas Eve.
Yep.
And then, just my mom always made sure that holidays were a special moment. And birthdays especially. She really went out of her way to make it a good experience for all of us.
Great.
So.
Great. Well, let's take a quick break and then we'll transition into talking about your initial belief in God and that testimony building process. Okay. Well, we're back for this next piece. So we're going to transition into talking a little bit about your initial beliefs in God. I think for a lot of people who maybe grow up in a church and have parents that are believers, we all get to this phase in life where you either are going to do it or you're not.
Right.
Talk to us a little bit about why you decided to stick with it.
Well, I was never one that doubted.
Okay.
I always had a belief in God. It was never a question for me, even from the earliest phase of my life. I can't remember doubting, actually. But different parts of my testimony came at different phases. So I actually played Joseph Smith in a little play that my mom put on.
Okay.
And when I was looking into the light, I actually realized that he really was a prophet of God. But that had come with a lot of preparation. We had those dramatized church history tapes back when I was younger, and I listened to them over and over and over again. So I had prepared my mind to be receptive. Unfortunately, my testimony, the Book of Mormon, lagged behind.
Yeah.
That didn't come really, I think, until college.
Okay. When
I realized I was going out to teach people about this book, and I really didn't have what I thought was the material to teach it. So I had to really dig deep. So I did a Book of Mormon class, and my roommate Nels and I worked on our testimonies together.
Okay.
So
cool. Yeah. So had some peer support from your friend. Didn't really had you read the book at that point? Or
I'd read it. I read it when I was younger, and then I reread it to get the storyline in place.
Gotcha.
To get some of the ideas in place. And that's when I felt that powerful witness.
Oh, cool.
It was true.
So did that witness kind of come in a specific moment for you? Or, I mean, of course, you do this background preparation to try to build things up.
Yeah.
Some people talk about how they never have a big moment, but it's a collective accumulation of all these things.
Yeah, mine was more a collective moment of a lot of little things. But then I actually had a dream of when I was in the MTC of baptizing somebody.
Oh.
And that actually really helped solidify what I was going out to do.
Okay.
So, yeah, that was really good.
Cool. So then decided to prepare to serve a mission at that point.
Yeah.
Opened up your call. Tell us a little bit about maybe your early missionary experiences and transitioning from this, because back then it wasn't 18 that you could leave. So you did a year of college,
Right.
Playing for the BYU soccer team, kind of figuring out your life path, but then you left. Tell me a little bit about that.
So one of my friends from high school was my roommate, Jeff Smith. And I was his wingman, basically, when he wanted to date different girls.
Okay.
And the ironic thing is we became better friends than he did with his girls that he was dating. And one of the girls was not a member, but she played for the BYU tennis team.
Okay.
And she asked me, she's like, why on earth would you leave soccer behind and go on a mission?
Yeah.
And I just said, well, everybody goes, don't they?
Sure.
And she's like,
That's
no,
not
they
true,
don't.
yeah.
So I realized I needed to figure out why it was going and what the purpose of it was. And I did.
Yeah.
I came to that realization.
So when you find, oh, sorry, I cut you off. Did you have anything else to say there? Okay. I was curious, what cities did you serve in while you were out on your mission?
So I started out in downtown Hartford.
Connecticut, yeah.
Yeah, it was East Hartford. So it was a pretty rundown place. We actually drove there with Mom.
Yeah, I remember this.
And the girls and Mom wanted to get out of there because it wasn't very safe.
Okay.
And then I went from Hartford to West Warwick, Rhode Island, which is kind of a similar place, kind of run down. And then I went from West Warwick. I trained a missionary in Rhode Island. And then I became a zone leader in Schenectady, New York. And I was there for about 9 months. And then I went to Derby, Connecticut. And I loved that area. That was a great one.
Yeah.
We had a lot of success there. And then I was kind of emergency transferred into a zone that had about 6 missionaries that were on the plane being sent home. And Salt Lake called out and said, give them one more chance. And so President Angus sent me in to be their one more chance.
Gotcha.
2 of them ended up going home. The other 4 stayed. But one of them actually went out with my sister. And he asked her, do you have a brother named John that serves in Connecticut? And when she said yes, she never saw him again. So,
okay.
Which was good. But that was the last month and a half of my mission.
Yeah.
So I didn't like the way it ended. But
sure. Well,
it wasn't my plan to babysit missionaries at the end.
We all get picked to do different things at different times. What were some of, I guess, the spiritual lessons that you learned? And, did any of those come through a specific experience with who you were teaching or the companion you were with?
So I think one of the things that really helped, I gained a real strong testimony of praying about what to do in your missionary work. I had my brand new trainee in West Warwick, Rhode Island, and I said, okay, let's kneel down and pray and decide where we're going to go tracting, because that was back in the day of tracting and knocking on doors. And so he prayed, and then he decided, okay, let's go to this street.
Sure.
And what he didn't understand is that we'd already been to that street 5 times.
Yeah.
Because we'd marked it out. But it was like the 5th house that we knocked on that we ended up teaching somebody, and she got baptized. So that was really cool. And then I was oftentimes put with missionaries who were really struggling with obedience. And I just saw how persistent obedience and studying the gospel helped these missionaries kind of get over their, I don't know what it was. I just don't think they were out there for the right reasons. But when we served together, we started having success.
Yeah.
And they're like, whoa, I didn't know that this was something that we could do.
Well, and I think this is a very relevant analogy to a lot of things going on in modern day life. Oftentimes there's this view that hard things of spiritual value is just not worth it.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to understand that until you take a step of faith and say, okay, I'm going to do this hard thing. That could be an array of things. If it's, for example, paying tithing or choosing to abstain from drinking alcohol because you know that's going to be a better choice. Not a lot of people get why those things are of value until you have one of two things happen. You choose to do it for yourself, or you live with somebody who's doing it and you see the blessings that brings them.
Yeah, I figured it wasn't valuable to just go ahead and attack them for not being obedient.
Not a good approach.
But just kind of humbly and persistently going about missionary work when they were allowing us to do that, and knowing God would bless us with success was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that ended up working out really well.
Great. Any other tidbits you want to comment on from your mission?
So you met President Angus.
Yeah.
My mission president. At the end of my mission, he told me whenever I had a difficult situation, I would transfer you into that difficult situation. So he had me as his fixer, I guess, which, it taught me a lot, which was good.
I think it prepared you for a lifetime of fixing.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, it's been good. And a lot of those techniques helped when I was a bishop up on campus.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah.
And I think we should discuss more about that experience on campus here in a bit. But transitioning then to coming home, I think that's the courtship phase of life.
Right.
Where you and Mom met. Let's talk a little bit about that. And I know that you always mention that Grandpa had somewhat of a role in it.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your perspective of what it was like to meet Mom and then begin your guys' courtship.
Right. So, Mom came to listen to my brother Ben do his farewell address.
Okay, so Ben was leaving.
Yeah. She had no idea he had an older brother.
Yeah.
But she was there, and my brother Ben said, this is now the opportunity for all you young ladies to be related to me, because now my brother's home. And at the house afterwards...
Mom took that seriously.
Yeah. My father kept asking Annette if she'd met me yet. And so we finally got introduced, and I was smitten from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So I had to wait for her to graduate from high school.
She was pretty young.
Yeah, before I could ask her out. But then we went out with one of my mission companions. Actually, it wasn't a companion. We were in the same
Okay, so friend from the
house.
mission.
Yeah. And we went out on a date. We went to Cherry Hill.
Okay.
Miniature golfing. And then we went to a wedding of one of our mission friends. And I remember our mission president driving in, and both of us jumped back from our dates just because we were so
a little
programmed.
bit of PTSD from
we didn't want to be
days.
Near girls with him there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But then we roasted marshmallows in the backyard of my parents' house.
Okay.
And we clicked. We had a good time, and we just kept dating, and she told me after.
Did you still have a mullet at that point?
No.
Oh, the mullet was gone.
No,
Okay.
because of the mission.
Ah, gotcha.
Yeah. But we kept dating. After the third date, she felt like it was necessary to tell me that she was going on a mission.
Yeah.
Which would have been 4 years if she'd have gone. And I just told her, great.
Okay, because she couldn't have left until age 21.
Right.
And
she was 18.
18 at that point.
Yeah. So I told her, great, you should go on a mission. I'll be here when you get back.
You were that sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I think that's been one of the things that, has been really good about our relationship, is that we give each other space to make choices. I hear a lot of couples who someone says, I'm probably going to go on a mission. And they'll say, well, I'm going to start dating other people then. But Mom was someone I wanted to be with, so
yeah. So if you're that serious about it,
I would have waited.
Yeah, and you want her to have her space to live her life. So, and then one of my favorite stories. It sounds like the second she ultimately decided, you know what, I think marriage might be my next step instead. What happened at that point?
So, she was out visiting for the weekend.
Yeah.
And it happened at Liberty Square in one of the stairwells where she just said, you know what, I think, like what you said, I think I might be more interested in getting married rather than going on a mission. And I was floored because she stayed with Gina Thorderson. And Gina was a big proponent of all young women going on a mission.
Sure. And
one night, Mom said to Gina, she's like, oh, I bet a mission is just fantastic. And Gina said, it is, but so is John. And so I think that kind of
started to sway her.
Yeah, started Mom swaying. And so I didn't know what to do when she told me that.
Yeah.
So the weekend, and she went back to Logan.
Yeah.
And then I was at soccer practice, and I went up to my coach, Dave Woolley, who was a good friend of mine, and he said, look, I've got to go propose.
Okay.
So I'm going to skip practice. And he said, get out of here, go get it done. So it was Halloween night.
Oh, okay.
We got engaged.
Nice.
Didn't have a ring, didn't do anything cool. Probably one of the most boring proposals in Allred history.
That's one way to look at it. But the other way is you knew what you wanted, saw your opportunity.
Had to take it.
Didn't wait.
Yep.
I think that's a good metaphor for how you've lived your life, is taking those opportunities. And, well, of course, we're all the better off for you and Mom ending up together. And so as you then kind of transitioned into living a life together, how did that work with your guys' college, your and Mom's goals kind of aligning? I guess the summary of this question is, how did you guys start out making it work?
So we lived in a really tiny apartment in Provo for my last semester at BYU. And then in the process, she got into the Weber State nursing program. So we both moved to Ogden to be together.
Yeah.
We didn't want to live apart and do college in different locations. So we went to Weber, and it turned out that it was a great setup for my education. The professors were fantastic, and they really got me prepped for medical school. And when I transferred there and gave up BYU soccer, about 9 other guys transferred to Weber State that had played college soccer. And our coach he actually helped coach the South African national team.
Oh, neat.
And he had played for them as well. And he immigrated to the United States and had to work a low-paying job. So he delivered papers on campus and coached our team for 2 years. So that first year we won the national championship.
That's a cool story.
The following year we took second.
Okay, wow.
So,
but you got the trophy, you got the gold. So
yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah,
so,
but it worked out with my Mom and I, our plans to be able to be together. Yeah. We lived in the basement of my grandparents' home. So
putting in the work, living in the cheapest spots, trying to make it work. Briefly, tell me a little bit about why you guys decided to get married in the temple, got married in the Salt Lake Temple.
Right. Well, it was obviously something that both of us had as a goal, so it wasn't ever in question. And so we just knew that, not to the degree that we know now, but we knew that making covenants with God was about the only way we felt comfortable starting our marriage.
Yeah.
And as we've been together now for 31 years, we realize how those covenants translate into the power of God in our lives.
One of the most amazing things to me about the temple covenant is the promise that relationships can be preserved beyond the grave.
Yeah.
And, considering that the eldest sibling in our sibship, Natalie, who I've never met,
right,
because she, passed before she was born, and then looking at our current situation, I can't imagine the difference that we would feel in both of those scenarios if we didn't have that eternal promise.
Yeah, that's a huge thing for me as well, because I definitely want to make sure, we're married whether I'm dead or alive.
Yeah.
And so having that promise is huge, because I always teach that I believe in the promises of God. I know they will be fulfilled. I'm the weak one in that promise. So, I can repent and I can get myself back in order, but God will fulfill his promises to his children as we do our best to be faithful to him.
Yeah.
And I feel like Mom and I have done that.
Yeah, so. I would agree. So then tell me a little bit about why you ultimately decided, I'm going to go to medical school. Did it have anything to do with Grandpa being a doctor?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, it was always good to see my dad in his role as a doctor. And I always liked how people respected him and that sort of thing. I just didn't realize how hard it would be to get through
You're telling me.
medical school. But yeah, my dad was a big part of it. But I realized after 24 hours on my pediatric rotation, I wasn't going to do what he was going to do.
You needed to do something else.
Yeah.
So when you decide to start a family in this process, being in the thicket of myself, it's a pretty intense time commitment to try to take care of your family and also be preparing for a career in medicine. And I would love to just get a little bit of your thoughts as you're preparing for med school and you have this challenging process of taking all the courses, putting your heart and soul on the line for people to judge whether or not you're worth getting into their school. Yeah. But then also having this goal of starting a family, to have it be a very sad initial experience with the loss of Natalie. Right. Could you talk to us a little bit about what that was like for you and Mom in that moment?
So when I transferred to Weber State, I was a sophomore at BYU. I went back to being a freshman at Weber State. So the remainder of my time in college, I had to take 20 plus credit hours to graduate in time. And so I did, and I really learned how to study very well. We were kind of shell-shocked from our experience with Natalie, so we held off, obviously getting pregnant till medical school. But I think doing all those credit hours at once really prepared me for medical school and all the load that you get.
Yeah.
But as far as my grades, they were average. As far as my MCAT, it was average. Although I did get the highest mark on the written essay. They used to have an essay on that test, and my mom had taught me how to write really well, so I got the top mark there. But it was enough that they couldn't ignore me.
Yeah.
So I ended up with 3 interviews because back then we had to fly out to those interviews.
Yeah, everything virtual.
Yeah. So, and then I was an alternate at 2 places, Wayne State and the University of Chicago. And then about a week into the new school year, Wayne State called, said they had a spot. So.
And you were working as a janitor at the time,
I was working
right?
as a janitor. Yep.
So what's that story? I remember, did somebody give a phone call and you're like, I'm done?
Yeah, my mom came over and said that Wayne State needed to talk to me. So I went and I called them from the high school because we were about to clean all the toilets. And when I found out I got on the intercom system and announced that I would no longer be cleaning any toilet in this school again. So, and everybody cheered. They were really excited for me.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that story. So how at all did the loss of Natalie and going through that experience with you and Mom ultimately influence your choice in what type of medicine you'd practice?
So OBGYN was my first rotation, and I liked it, but I didn't plan on becoming an OBGYN. But then as I went through all the other specialties, I realized I was happiest there. Mm-hmm. And Mom kind of encouraged me, and so did my mother. They both encouraged me to go into OBGYN. But the loss of Natalie had a huge impact on my desire to be there for patients when they went through something similarly.
Yeah.
And I've had ample opportunity to be involved when people have lost their babies.
Yeah. To
sit down with them and help give them some perspective and to kind of help the healing process, because in medicine you can do it really poorly, and that makes it even harder for patients to navigate through. But if you're there with them, you help support them, help them understand that you've kind of been through something similar. I think it really helped a lot of my patients navigate it.
It adds a human aspect to the whole, the tragedy of the loss of a baby.
Yeah.
Right? It's not that your words necessarily make anything better, but at least you know what they're going through. So on a more spiritual level, you can empathize and understand the
they start off with a decent foundation from where they can build.
Yeah.
Because they're going to go through lessons that I can't really walk them through. Mm-hmm. You have to do it on your own.
Yeah.
And it's been nice because most of those patients, if they're still around, they come back to see me.
Yeah.
So that was really rewarding.
Yeah, I imagine so. I'd love to hear briefly where you and Mom were at with each of us kids being born. And, not that we have to spend a lot of time talking about each one, but where were you guys at in life when Hannah was born? And maybe describe, maybe one or two things that happened from that day that you remember.
So, she was born in 1995, October. And I would have been in my second year of medical school. And when Mom was overdue, and there were two of us with wives that were due around the same time. Mm-hmm. And we were taking our final exams, and Mom was overdue. And my friend Nels finished his test early, and he went out to the hall phone and paged both of our delivery pagers. And so we hurried and marked C on everything. And then we went out, and he was just laughing at us.
Oh, so, what a mean joke.
Yeah, that was pretty ruthless, but we still passed. So
you're
that was
here.
Good.
You'd made it.
But then Mom, the challenge for Mom, we were planning on her transferring to another nursing school in Michigan, but they wouldn't accept any of her credits. So after Hannah was born, we had to face the reality that either Mom doesn't get her degree or we live apart.
Yeah.
And so we lived apart for about a year.
Yeah.
And
just to pause, I think that's pretty cool. You're like, either you don't get a degree or we live together. And it was almost that there was no question that you wanted to prioritize Mom in that moment and allow her to have that opportunity to build her career. That's cool. And I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and the reality is we never thought I would be dying.
Right.
So Mom has a degree that she can use if need be.
Right.
I think she's probably going to become a massage therapist instead, but she has the degree. And it was tough, but you were a byproduct of that time away. And that
I remember that story. You hadn't seen each other for a long time, and out popped Kale, the accident, right? Well, I hope I can be the best accident you ever made.
Oh, definitely. But yeah, we really did not enjoy that time, but I got in really good shape and was getting to the top of my class. Yeah. But when you and Hannah were both born...
And so I would have been born your 4th year of medical school, is that right?
It would have been, 1997. Actually, it was my 3rd year.
Okay.
And so, but you can see my grades plummet with each of your births.
My apologies.
But my grades did a lot of this. But I ended up graduating in the top half of my class, so I was glad about that.
It's interesting. I was kind of, as we were preparing for this, I looked up, did a little online calculator to see how old you would have been the day I was born.
Right.
And it's something like 27 years, a month, and a couple days. And it's interesting because I'm 26 right now, 27 in March. And so this whole life that I've lived up until this point didn't have me in it, which is just kind of an interesting thought as I'm... Catherine and I are thinking about expanding our family. We've got our 2 kids. It's just so interesting to look at your experience and say you had lived so much of this life that I just wasn't even a part of until the end of medical school.
Yep. But and I think whenever a child comes into your family, it's a good time.
Absolutely.
But Mom and I are just really glad we got married young.
Yeah.
And lived our lives together.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people that thought we were making a big mistake, but I'm glad we didn't listen.
Had that faith to go forward. And so then when it came to residency time, that's when Grace was born, right?
Right.
So you decided, I've had some positive experiences in OB. I've tried some other things, and OB felt pretty relevant. What was it like when you finally matched?
Oh, it was actually a really good feeling. So I matched at my top spot. And I was told when I got there that I was ranked in the top 6 because they took 6 residents.
Took 6. Yeah. Okay.
So it was a really good fit for me. And the training program was phenomenal. John Musich was our residency director, and he's just one of the best residency directors that they've had.
Yeah.
We actually got to connect with him just a little while ago. And he got us really set up. He was able to see where we were weak, and he'd bring us in and talk to us about our weak spots and tell us we had to correct things.
Yeah.
Mine was that I always wanted to be right, and most of the time I was, but I wasn't very nice in showing that.
Sure.
He says, if you go out to practice in Rexburg with this attitude, you won't last for a year. So I had a year and a half to work on my attitude, and it really helped.
It's interesting how some of those jarring moments where somebody's telling you, sorry, you need to adjust something. For me personally, it hits. But then if you have an open mind to reflect on it, it can really influence. And Rexburg being a pretty small, tight-knit community, and of course, you're going to make mistakes. Not everybody's going to like you. But if you don't have the intentions of trying to rub people's shoulders right, it could probably really create a problem for you. I mean, we've always talked about, rumors spread like wildfire in Rexburg. So.
Right. And the nice thing is this is such a good community to be involved with if you do it correctly.
Yeah.
And there's always a breaking in phase for new people that move here. And that's okay, but we that's why it's going to be so hard to leave this area and go back to Utah. But we've just loved it here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, before we kind of leave this phase of bringing kids in, I'd love to hear one or two things that you remember from the day that I was born, and then one or two things that you remember from when Grace was born.
Okay. So going back to everybody, Hannah was 2 weeks overdue.
Yeah.
And we found out during the delivery that the doctor never gave anybody epidurals. So Mom couldn't get one.
Oh, no.
And then she had really kind of a traumatic birth. And
this is with Hannah?
Yeah, okay. It was with Hannah. And we were at a Catholic hospital. So it was an interesting scenario. And then your birth was actually, I was in the middle of my OB rotation. And so I knew the doctor really well.
Oh, cool.
And we were about an hour away from the hospital. And when we got to the hospital, Mom was about ready to push you out. So we barely made it. She got her epidural as you slid out.
Didn't quite have time to kick in, eh?
Yeah, and then Grace was induced. So, and we actually faked the whole labor thing. We had Mom get her bladder really full. She was already 3 centimeters dilated. So she went into the hospital and had a couple of really good contractions. And it was a first year that was doing all the admissions.
Sure.
So I kind of pushed the issue and she got admitted. So, and that one took longer than, about as long as Hannah's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
But it all went really well.
Yeah.
We would hide all the heart rate monitors and everything so we couldn't watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't want to worry.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Before we move away from this residency time of life, do you have any memories or experiences you'd like to document?
From residency?
Yeah, just that time.
Well, so one of the things we didn't have restrictions on our hours.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So I was in charge of a moonlighting hospital, which was about 30, 40 minutes away. And there were 2 of us that ran the schedule, and eventually it was just the 2 of us that was covering the hospital. And so you and Hannah and Grace had no idea when Christmas actually was, but I got paid double.
Oh, you got double Christmas. So you just said, hey, we're going to make Christmas December 30th.
Yeah, so we did it whenever it worked out convenient for us.
That's I'll take note of that. I'm probably going to need that in years.
But yeah, it was worth the money because with that money, we were able to save them for a down payment on a house.
Yeah.
When we moved here.
You know, a lot of people who are religious, whatever religion that be, you have your own practices and your way of life. And being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in this residency program, did you have any experiences where maybe you were able to share the gospel or, you know, where religion became an important part of your experience?
Oh, yeah. I had regular opportunity to do that. In fact, you know, when anytime General Conference was on, I would have it going on the computers in the lounge, and I'd just be listening unless I was needed to go do something. And then I had a really good discussion with one of the other residents. She ended up joining the church down the road.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. She married a member of our church who had gone through a divorce and things like that. And they decided they wanted to bring religion back into their lives. And so she remembered what I'd said.
How neat.
When the Detroit Temple was open for an open house, I got to take all the residents through.
Oh, wow.
And that was really cool. My residency director said, yeah, feel free, you know, just it was actually during work hours too. Yeah. And he's like, yeah, I want them to see it. So it was really good. And one of them actually called me when her mom passed away. This was probably like 3 or 4 years ago. And she was curious. She's like, I remember you saying something about life after death when we went through your temple. So tell me about this families being together sort of thing.
What's that all about?
Yeah, and so I re-explained the doctrine. And I offered to send missionaries over, and she said, no.
I'm good, yeah.
Yeah, but she told her daughter that doctrine.
Wow.
And it helped.
That's cool. Well, I think we're at a point where we could take another pause and then kind of transition into talking a little bit about fatherhood and how you approached that phase of life. You know, one of the things that when I have friends saying, hey, what's it like having your first kid? I often say, what I didn't realize at the beginning of all of it is that you have quite a while to get it right. It's not like you have to be the perfect dad day one. What I say, and going back to a theme we already touched on, is you have to be intentional about it. So we'll pause and then kind of get into how you were intentional about developing as a father.
Sounds good.
We were left off talking a little bit about fatherhood and how you approached that initially. Mm-hmm. What was your approach to being a dad?
So I had no idea what I was doing at all. In fact, we thought we were horrible parents because Hannah was a bit of a colicky baby.
Okay.
And we tried a lot of different things. There was one night that she was just screaming, and we thought it was just her.
Okay.
But what had happened is I had put her sock on and bent one of her toes back. So that was my bad. But we eventually found that she liked the singer Seal, and she really liked Richard Gere's face. He was an actor.
Oh, okay.
So we were watching a movie first night, and Hannah was screaming as usual. And then they had a cameo on him. She stopped, started sucking her binky. So we recorded it, and when she was mad, we'd sit her in front of the TV with his face on the TV and Seal playing in the background.
Nice.
And that worked.
You got to find what works as a parent, right?
So, and then with you guys getting you to bed was a complete combination lock. So we had to talk about what was going on the next day. We had several songs that we had to sing, and then you guys would go to bed.
So we were pretty rigid in our ways.
Yeah, it was a consistent platform that we had to follow to get you guys in bed. But yeah, so you learn along the way how to father. And Mom, unfortunately, spent a lot of time on her own because I was not only doing residency, but I was also doing my moonlighting job, and I was also in the young men's presidency in our ward. Mm-hmm. So I had a lot going on.
You did. Had a lot going on. And then how did that, so moving through the years, I mean, I was under the roof for 18 years. How did that old relationship, maybe let's go between you and I, kind of develop? How did you approach maybe conflicts that I had? What kind of insight did you give us?
Well, I think the key with being a father is realizing how God functions. I mean, we're never going to function at his level, but one of the primary gifts that he gives everybody is agency. And so there are certain things, obviously, that you have to have discipline for.
Right.
I mean, if you are in a house which is completely merciful, your kids don't learn respect. So there's definitely an appropriate amount of justice that needs to be delivered in a home. And I think that's important for kids to understand where the guidelines are. But the key with agency is to allow your children to make choices and then talk about the choices that go bad. Yeah. You know, and I think anytime a parent feels like agency should be withdrawn, that's where you're going down the wrong road as a parent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's this balance between guidance and justice, as you put it, but also, you know, allowing them to grow for who they are.
Right.
On this topic of maybe some justice, this room right here will always be embedded in my mind. I remember various circumstances, and I tried to be a good kid. I won't lie. I don't think I screwed up too bad, but I remember several occasions where, crap, Dad wants to talk.
Yeah.
Came into this office. You would be on the far side of the desk. I would be on this side of the desk. And it started off with a healthy level of fear. I'm not going to lie. And I don't know if that was your approach, and I don't think you ever meant to strike fear. But when you are the child and you're talking to your father, who you respect, and you want them to care about you and love you, it can be intimidating. But I remember always leaving those conversations feeling this overwhelming sense that you cared about who I was and you wanted to help me be better. And sometimes that was actually worse. Like sometimes I just wanted you to get mad at me and send me to my room, but you never did. It was this moment where you'd help me understand the mistake.
Right.
And then showed me compassion and mercy and gave me these opportunities that always ultimately ended up in a hug. And I really appreciate that.
And you weren't the only one that spent time in this room.
That's true.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I think that's important to highlight where the problems are and then discuss the problems. And obviously, Matt looks at me and my parenting skills like I know everything there is to know about parenting. But he didn't watch when we had really young children.
Okay, yeah, Matt, your youngest brother.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, I've told him that multiple times. He's like, I just wish I could be a dad more like you are. And I'm like, my kids are adults.
There's a difference.
There's a little bit of an easier time when they're adults.
I'll be honest, when William is wanting fruit snacks at 2 a.m., I'm much more justice driven.
Right. Yeah.
But it's a good insight, right? Is like there's a difference between rationalizing with a 4-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 17-year-old, and then, an adult 26-year-old. The level of maturity is different, and you have to approach each of those scenarios giving counsel.
Yeah. Well, and one of the other things I think that is important when you're raising a family is there's different types of intimacy. So there's intellectual intimacy, there's emotional intimacy, and spiritual intimacy. And you can share those with your children as they mature. And I think one of the things that I enjoyed is that I felt like I could talk to all my kids.
Yeah.
And I think that came from focusing on some of those other areas, so that we had a kind of a mutual respect. And Mom did the same thing. I mean, she's always someone that you guys feel like I think you can talk to.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to establish that as you raise your children.
One of the ways I've conceptualized our relationship as I've gotten older is that you have had the appropriate amount of discipline and justice to not be seen initially as a friend, but a mentor, a guider, a figure. And then as I've grown into my own maturity, you have stayed present, you have stayed focused, and then it has developed into what I would consider to be a genuine friendship.
Right.
And I think that's an important lesson, is that you it was interesting because when William was born, I grew with him.
Right.
And then 3 years later when Eleanor was born, I had all this growth to look back on with him. Yeah. But when Eleanor was born, I was like, who are you?
Yeah.
I don't know you. And then now that she's a year and a half, we have our relationship. Right. But that gave me this chance to really kind of put into perspective of the relationship between a father and a child changes over time.
Yeah.
And I think you gave a great example of if you are not making an effort to be present, that relationship won't keep growing.
Right.
And by being there and allowing that relationship to grow, it's interesting. I can look back, and of course you and Mom made mistakes. We as children made mistakes. But in my eyes, you didn't put a foot wrong. Of course, yeah.
We did.
You did, right?
Yeah.
But in my eyes, being able to look back and see those experiences, now being a dad, I can see, wow, there was some serious amount of intentionality about how you approached our relationship. You stayed present, you stayed with it, and ultimately, when you ultimately leave, let's hope you have a long time left. Who knows?
Right.
But the way I've come to think of this is that if I get you for 26, 27, 28 years, you will have given me more in that time period as a father than some dads who get 40 or 50 years with their kids because of how you approached it.
Yeah. And that's, when Mom and I had children, we wanted to be intentional parents.
Yeah.
We wanted to be involved. One of the main reasons we built this house, because we were teetering on whether or not to do it.
Yeah.
We wanted our kids to be here. We wanted their friends to be here. And, obviously this was the hangout house.
It was, yeah.
Through high school. And it was great to see all of our kids do that during their time.
There's so many people that have been through these walls.
Oh, yeah.
Have played downstairs. And, it's interesting in talking to a lot of my friends in recent days, with the house currently being up for sale and then ultimately being sold, there's a sense of loss in the sense that this was a safe place for us. This is a place where we could come play soccer downstairs. We could watch a movie upstairs, and there's so many of my friends who love and respect you and Mom for that. So in hindsight, there's a lot of people that are grateful you guys went for it.
Yeah, it was a smart move. Wasn't a smart move financially because that was when the economy busted.
Yeah.
But,
and this is not a financial advice podcast, so we won't, there's no need to.
Right.
But one of the things that you and Mom really taught me with how you used your money is to be generous and invest in experiences.
Yeah.
We saw the world with you guys, and, that was something that really shaped my worldview, helped me understand differences of perspective, and just the joy and excitement that can come from the amazing opportunities the world has to offer.
Well, and Mom and I wanted you guys to realize that the world isn't as big as you think. You can travel and you can enjoy yourself in any country you wanted to. And what I've seen from you guys is that you're not concerned about it. Like, it doesn't fill you with fear and dread to fly overseas.
Right.
And to go be involved in things that you probably would have thought, well, I can't do that. But you do. And that's the good thing. I mean, luckily Grace didn't tell me this till she got home from Korea. But she spent most of her time in Korea on her own. Yeah. Just, she could do it. She knew what to do because we've been overseas. Yeah. So it didn't intimidate her.
And I think another theme of your fatherhood experience in my eyes has been giving your kids the wings they need to go out for whatever. I mean, look at Hannah, went out, became a lawyer, went law school, me with med school, had that goal to go out there. Grace pursuing a passion in apparel design. Right. Of course, there's always fear and concern, but you and Mom have really been able to help us feel like we have the confidence to succeed. Like, we're going to go out there and we're going to get it done.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, we'll get criticism from people sometimes, but we always say, I will put my 3 kids up against your 6 kids any day.
Sure.
Because you guys go for it. And that's something that we like to see.
Yeah. Going back to kind of the theme of people coming in and out of the house, one of the greatest experiences for me growing up with you was your consistency as a coach. So I love soccer myself, and you chose to coach me for several years and were always there whether or not you were my head coach in some way, shape, or form. How did you approach your role as coaching?
Honestly, I think I did that very similarly to the way I approached being a father. I knew I wasn't their fathers,
Right.
everybody on the team, but I wanted to treat them as such because I think you get the most out of somebody when they trust you. Those are the coaches that I really trusted, and I had some fantastic coaches. There were a couple that I didn't trust them as well, but most of my coaches I really enjoyed playing for because I knew I could trust them.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to do with all the boys around here, is get to the point where we had a good relationship.
Yeah.
And I luckily had good partners at work that allowed me to switch some of my calls so I could be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
So
on the soccer theme, it's interesting. I've had this perspective on our relationship over the years that, I chose to do soccer like you did, chose to do medicine like you did. And I think for a time I went through this phase of why I want my own thing. I want to be my own person. But as I've gotten older, I see it more of a tribute. And I'm doing this for me. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
I'm going to med school for me and my family and the goals we have. But as I've matured, I've kind of come to understand that I view my desire to pursue similar things almost as a tribute to the amazing man that you've been in my life and the coach that you have been in my life as well. One experience I wanted to share, I remember, and I may get emotional with this one because, this was just a key time. I think this was senior year of high school. It was senior season, and the missionary age had changed, so you could then go and leave at 18, or you could stick around and go to college, and I was kind of trying to figure that out. I wanted to get onto the BYU soccer team like no other, and came into some roadblocks there. And I think I was struggling with my shooting. I don't really know. It doesn't matter. But you packed me up in the car, and we went down to the old junior high where the stadium is down there, and we set up the goal. And initially it started out as drills, and we were drilling, doing shots. And I was just frustrated, doing terribly, not making them. And ultimately, maybe it was intentional, maybe it wasn't, but with the development of those drills, ultimately I kind of opened up and started breaking down. Yeah. Just like, I don't know what I'm doing. Right. Where's life going to go? And I can't remember a single thing that you told me, and I wish I could. I just remember the feeling that you were there for me and you wanted success for me. And ultimately, I left that moment feeling like not only could I trust you, but you were going to help make it okay, no matter what ended up happening. And it's funny to look back at the trials I've gone through since. And, when you're a 17, 18-year-old, it seems like the end of the world. It absolutely wasn't. There's been a lot more crap since. But that was such a needed thing at the time. And I think it laid a framework for me to understand that, because in a way you could view my experience in soccer as a failure. In a way you could view it as success. I mean, I ultimately made the spring team at BYU. But then I came home from my mission. They had a coaching switch up, and I got an amazing job offer to teach missionaries at the MTC. And I took that. Right. You would have told that to me when I was 17, I would have been devastated. Like, this was all a failure. Right. But now looking back, and don't get me wrong, I miss that feeling of the ball hitting the back of the net almost more than anything else. Right. But I found my own path. I learned that failures can actually be for your benefit if you're willing to keep your eyes open and your heart open to the Spirit. Right. And that led me down a path to where Catherine and I were able to get married and do what was best for our early years. Right. That ultimately has led to a developing career. Yeah. And ironically, we both chose differently, because I was offered a job at the MTC as well. Yeah. And I chose soccer. Yeah. Which didn't help our finances much
when we got married. But luckily our rent was like $200 a month.
Yeah.
So it wasn't too bad. We could scrape up that kind of money.
Multiply that by 10, and that's what we're paying now.
Right, exactly. But yeah, I appreciate that. That's kind of, I think, what a father's ultimate hope is for his children, is that they're capable of then having a foundation and making decisions based on that foundation.
Yep.
So,
well, those are great thoughts, and thanks for being the man you were when it came to fatherhood. So similar time of life, when we were kind of growing up, you were establishing your career as then out of residency physician. Tell me a little bit about why you chose to come to Rexburg.
Well, we turned down the job offer twice. And then we were interviewing in Salt Lake, and they talked us into coming up and seeing what was here. And so when we got off the exit, I felt this overwhelming feeling that we were going to live here. And Mom felt the same way. So we actually pulled over to the side of the road on the exit. I'm like, you felt that, right? And Mom's like, yep.
Part of you's like, dang it, Rexburg? Why?
Yeah, we were so upset. But it was the best choice I think we've ever made.
Yeah.
Because I think just the community, the people here, it's been a pleasure to be able to be involved in so many ways in the community.
I mean, growing up, we go to the grocery store with you. There's going to be 3 people asking you to, come check out my baby. You delivered them 2 years ago. Or, hey, I have a gynecology question for you. Do you have a minute? And it's like, maybe the grocery store is not the best place for that conversation.
Right.
But yeah, your influence has been pretty vast when, I think there's maybe 5 OBs in town now. Earlier there were less, but there's a lot of people that have benefited from, your career and profession. Do you have any specific experiences from your time practicing that you'd like to share?
So the most formative experience I had was actually when I had a patient pass away. It's not something that you recover from that easily. She ended up having what's called an amniotic fluid embolus. So even if she would have survived, it would have been challenging for her. And I tried to keep contact with her husband, but eventually he got pretty upset.
Sure.
And so our paths that kind of diverged for a while. But through the process of some really miraculous scenarios that were played out, he actually forgave me during that time frame, and I did not realize how much weight I was carrying because of that death. I figured if I carried all the weight, he wouldn't have to.
Yeah.
And I was just amazed at how quickly that was taken away from me, and we've become really good friends, and so it was a good relationship. And he heard about my condition, and he actually wants to get together with me.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
So there's more to that story to unfold. I think I remember there was a physician in town that heard about what happened that day and came and helped you through it.
Dr. Zollinger.
Yeah.
He knew what I was doing because I went home and I was planning to quit.
Yeah.
And he had a patient that died. And he came over, it was like 10 at night when he heard about it. He knocked on the door, came into our bedroom and sat down, said, I know what you're thinking. You need to stop thinking that.
Yeah.
Because we need your skill set.
Yeah.
We need you here in Rexburg to step up and do what you've been capable of doing.
Well, it's interesting. So President Nelson, leader of our church, in one of the books that's been written about his life, I did not realize the vast amount of patients that passed under his care.
Right.
And, that's a very interesting thing that maybe I don't know the best way to talk about, but it's not necessarily a mistake. The truth and the reality of choosing to take on the mantle of being a physician is that you can't always make everybody okay. You do your best to know the most you can so that the people under your care can have their best chance. But sometimes it's out of our control.
Right.
And going back to this theme of Christ being a healer in that scenario for you and this gentleman, the timeline was different. It wasn't that he chose to heal it all right away.
Right.
And for whatever reason, that's a burden that had to be carried for a lot longer.
Right.
But it's beautiful to see that even then, he remembered the need to heal that scenario all these years later.
Right. Yeah, it was a really powerful experience for me. And then I think when you're willing to put yourself in scenarios where you can be of service to God, I think he creates those scenarios where you can heal things.
Yeah.
One of the things my patriarchal blessing says is it encourages me to make myself available for the work of the ministry. And that's an intentional decision that I've always made, to be available to serve God whenever I'm asked. And so I think that's been a real blessing. Obviously, the other scenarios at work that I really take a lot of joy from is the delivery of my grandbabies. For sure. William scared me to death.
Yeah, he scared all of us.
So
while we're getting into this, I was out shadowing because I had known I wanted to do medical school at that point, and I get this phone call from Catherine. She says, "Hey, I was in a little, car accident, had been rear-ended a little bit, but we think everything's okay. We're just going to go get checked out." And I had one of those moments where God's telling you something, and I was just like, I think I'm going to go.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to see what happens. So I start driving on the freeway, and I think it was right as I'm pulling off, you call me, and you're like, maybe you could just come to the hospital. We're going to check things out. We still didn't know that things were progressing quick at that point, and we can talk a little bit more about your perspective of things, but I just remember getting to the hospital and probably within 45 minutes to an hour having a baby.
Yeah.
And I was not expecting to have a baby. That Catherine still had 6 more weeks of pregnancy as far as we were concerned.
Yeah.
So when we were at the hospital, kind of explain the scenario around kind of when you realized something was going wrong and what that was like.
So when she came into the office, luckily Catherine and I talked a lot during her pregnancy. Just she felt comfortable calling me about the car accident. So she came into the office and she was contracting every 2 minutes, which is not a good sign after a car accident.
Right.
So we sent her up to the hospital. Janelle, one of the nurses, checked her. She was 3 to 4 centimeters dilated at 30. Was it 32 or 34?
I think we're 34.
34 weeks. And there was bleeding.
Yeah.
And again, that's not normal either. So luckily William looked good most of the time. But Catherine was starting to bleed. And so the OB side of me knew it was an abruption. But the grandpa side of me didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Right.
But luckily, Ed and Matt were both there because they heard what was going on. And I'm like, okay, this is the OB telling me what to do, but Grandpa needs reassurance from you two. And they're like, duh.
Get that baby out.
Let's get the baby out. So we did, and everything turned out okay. And she had a little over a 50% abruption where the placenta had pulled away at least 50%.
Yeah.
The amniotic fluid was bloody, and so yeah, it was a good diagnosis. And then obviously William's done fine.
Yeah.
But it's scary.
It was. I remember a special moment after walking over to the NICU where William was and getting to kind of meet him for the first time. You came up and put your arm around my shoulder, and it was like kind of a passing of the torch moment. It's like it was so special. And having talked about how your experiences with losing your first, then ultimately wanting to do OB, and then having one of, in my eyes, the most beautiful moments of your career is kind of, in a sense, helping William come into this life alive and healthy. And what a beautiful full circle moment.
Yeah, that was fantastic. What you didn't see is after everything was over, I almost collapsed.
I imagine
On my own. Matt was there, and he kind of helped me navigate, because that was a hard situation to be in. But I'm glad everything worked out. And then I went in to see William every day. He was in the nursery.
Yeah, you did grandpa rounds.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, and it's fun to see how your relationship with him has developed.
Yeah,
he will always know Grandpa John, and we'll make sure that as he gets older, the lessons you taught me get passed down to him. So, and
then Ella's birth was just phenomenal in that Catherine was able to get through.
Yeah, I think in your term as grandpa, what a special way for the kids to come into the world is having you be a part of that.
Yeah. Doesn't look like I'll be delivering any more grandbabies.
Yeah.
But those two were really special.
They were.
And the nurses, I'll have written about it in my little book they gave me, that they could tell that what was most...
Yeah, the labor and delivery nurses came and kind of shared a book with you with some memories last night. Yeah.
Yeah, they all know where my priorities lie. They lie with God and my family. Yep. And they always admired that.
Yeah.
So...
a couple more things to talk about, and actually backing up a second, we've talked about this, though you won't be physically delivering our kids, if you are on the other side and it somehow works out that you get to give them some advice, make sure to send them this way for success.
Yeah, we will be having family meetings.
Deliver those kids from the other side.
Yep. Yeah, I'll be trying to influence them for sure.
Please do. A few brief themes before we kind of move on from your career. Owned and practiced at Madison Women's Clinic for a long time. Put your heart and soul into that. And then ultimately had the opportunity to work alongside your youngest brother, Matt, who I know respects you. I mean, him and I have talked a lot, even in recent days, about, how much we look up to and appreciative of your guidance. Talk us through a little bit about what it was like to own that practice and then ultimately, have some good partners and then getting to work with your brother.
Right. So, the first stage of my career was kind of difficult.
Yeah.
But I have had so much joy working with Matt over the years because we get each other. Yeah. And we have a lot of fun in surgery, and that's been a huge blessing for us. And so it really kills me not to be able to keep working.
Yeah.
But that's how it goes.
One of the wonderful things about my medical school experience is in your last few months of being able to work, I got the opportunity to come and do a rotation with you.
Yeah.
And that was a cool moment for me because I had worked doing in and out jobs at the clinic. I mean, I painted the railing. I took out the trash. I came back and shadowed. I came back and did some phlebotomy. And then here we are several years later where I'm in an actual capacity preparing to start as a physician in the next few years and got to receive my initial training in OBGYN from you, Matt, and Ed. And I just wanted to throw that out there, like how amazing that God orchestrated that for us.
Right.
Because, I thought about going to the University of Utah for a long time. And the pros of that, looking to the next bit, is you and Mom are trying to relocate out there right now. And I would have been able to get my fourth year out there, and we would have had maybe a little more connectivity in that period. To me, what's so special about how God has led my path and our relationship with medicine is that I got to do my third year rotation with you. I wouldn't have been able to do a fourth year rotation with you, which is probably the only way we would have been able to rotate together at the University of Utah. So having that moment to get to be your assist in surgery. Not that I was any help, but I got to share the operating room with you. I got to be there with Matt, who I love, and got a lot of mentorship from Ed.
Yeah.
But what an amazing opportunity it was to do that. And then several months later, when you ultimately got your diagnosis, we got to share one of your last days in clinic together. And, that to me is something that it'll always be here.
Right.
And part of what I hope to do as I move forward into this phase of being a resident in the next few years, I hope to continue to exemplify the career that you have chosen to live in selfless service to others and loving those around you. So anyway.
Well, you got us through that last day because Donna and I were both shell-shocked. We were not focused, but we got through it.
Yeah.
So that was good.
Yeah, we got through it. Well, I think that's a good place where we can kind of pause, and then we'll reconvene probably tomorrow to discuss a little bit more about your experiences in some spiritual leadership.
Right.
And then ultimately we can transition into sharing some pieces of wisdom, lessons you've learned throughout your life that you want documented.
Cool.
Alrighty, well, we're back. It's a new day, feeling a little bit more rested, and we are going to do probably 2 segments today. For this first one, wanting to talk a little bit about your experiences serving in the church. So there's been a lot of them, ranging from when you were younger, more of my age, to now serving in the stake presidency.
Yeah.
One of the stories that I personally remember was, maybe it was med school, maybe it was college, but you and your friend were called into the young men's and had some intense responsibilities. Is that right?
Yeah. So that was actually in medical school. Nels and I were called in. Nels Thorderson. He was my roommate my freshman year of college. And then we went to medical school together, and we were in the same city for our residencies. We got called into the young men's presidency, and we had a kid that lived in Detroit, like downtown Detroit. Mm-hmm. It was in our ward boundary. So we went to pick him up every morning for early morning seminary. And he had 14 dogs.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So a unique kid for sure, but we made sure he was on his porch when we drove by because we didn't want to really stop the engine.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, being in medical school and holding a calling can be pretty intense.
Yeah.
What have you learned about, I guess, fulfilling those responsibilities and how that impacted your ability to do other things?
So, one of the things my patriarchal blessing talks about is making myself available for the purposes of the master. And as I do that, I'll be able to have the strength to do everything else. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to just put that to the test and make sure whatever I was called to do, I did what was necessary, and things seemed to work out. Yeah, there's
a concept that we talk about a lot in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints surrounding priesthood power, called the Oath and Covenant of the Priesthood.
Right.
And one of the promises that you taught me from an early age was that when we fulfill those priesthood responsibilities, God also renews your body. Yeah. And there are times in my life where it's like you don't have energy to do anything, and then you have a calling to fulfill.
Right.
And somehow expending more energy to do that calling gives you energy.
Yeah. And you do have to strike a delicate balance. I mean, there's that concept where you have this idea that if you do everything you can with your calling, God will give you specific blessings. Kind of like as I think Elder Christofferson talked about this being a vending machine sort of blessing.
Yeah, you put in a quarter, the gumball comes out.
You can't decide what blessings you receive. So you also have to make sure that you're focused on your immediate responsibilities. So there were things that I missed during my young men's, during the time I served in the young men's, but I had to study.
Yeah.
I had to be prepared to take my board exams and get a job and get into a residency program I wanted to get into. So but I do think God gives you that ability to strike that balance. Mm-hmm. And it's a hard balance to get, but I think in the process of serving and keeping the Holy Ghost with you, you can make those decisions, I think.
For sure.
So,
while we were growing up, you served in various callings in the church, I think young men's quite a bit. I remember specifically when it came time to me leaving on my mission, one thing that we frequently do in the church as well is we can give priesthood blessings to one another, kind of as a way for us to get insight from God. And I remember you asked me for a blessing, and we talked, a little bit about in that blessing that you'd have some more unique opportunities for missionary service.
Yeah.
And then I remember recently, after going out on my mission, you were called into being a member of the state council. Is that right?
Yeah, I was called into the High Council. Yeah, and that was a fantastic experience. I got assigned to the 4th Ward here in the East Stake, and I had kind of a Jiminy Cricket that would kind of whisper things to me. His name's Bernie Jensen. He's just a fantastic guy. He would sit behind me on the stand and whisper, okay, now you get up and do the stake business. And he was with me for a while. But yeah, he taught me a lot about serving. And I just kind of made myself a part of the 4th Ward because they met at the same time our Harvest Hills ward met. So
the state, in the High Council, you have the opportunity, right, to be in a ward that's not necessarily your own.
Right.
Could be, but then you just kind of oversee and see what things they need specifically. Is that kind of the gist?
Yeah, you represent the stake presidency in that ward. Mm-hmm. And you go to ward council. I'm specifically assigned to the elders quorum. Mm-hmm. And so so I would go to all their meetings, and it ended up being really a good scenario because the elders quorum president in that ward had 92 elders. And so he had a lot of people to deal with. So he would come over here, and actually we would meet in this room and talk about how to approach things and what to do in the quorum with that many people.
Yeah.
So it was a really cool experience.
That's neat.
I was there for, I think, 3 years. And then after that, I got called up on campus as a bishop.
Yeah, so what does it look like to be a bishop of a bunch of young adults in Rexburg, Idaho?
So that was a really cool experience because I was in Center Square.
That's an apartment complex here. Yeah,
apartment complex, and mostly freshmen go into that one. So we had a lot of new students, and it really gave Mom and I a unique perspective on how prepared these students are to come. There were times where, you could tell that students were ready to go. But then there were other apartments where, actually I remember Mom and I visiting an apartment with young men, all brand new freshmen. We knocked on their door, they invited us in, but then they kept playing their video games. Okay,
so they just
we tried
eyes glazed, facing at the camera, not even registering somebody else is in the room.
Yeah, we tried talking to them, and they just kept playing their games. We looked in their closet with their food. They had like gummy bears, Lucky Charms, like nothing healthy. And when we left, Mom leaned over and she said, they'll be dead in a month if we don't do some interventions here. So we helped them.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like my early college days, the typical go to the grocery store, grab whatever looks delicious.
Yeah.
Getting married was good for me.
Yeah, it was a unique experience. And I really gained some respect for what some of these young men and young women go through in their home life. I used to have this concept that there was no excuse to do pornography. I just couldn't get myself to the point where there was an excuse. But then after talking to so many young men that dealt with it, and believe it or not, young women as well, they were exposed when they were really young, like 8, 9, and 10.
I see.
And they didn't have anyone to talk to about it. So
when you grow up with this habit, albeit an unhealthy one, and one that, doesn't necessarily lead towards a healthy marriage relationship long term, when that's part of your daily schedule from 8 years old, it's part of who you are.
Yeah.
And how do you break that?
And it's a difficult thing to break because you establish some neural pathways in your brain because of that, and you just have a really hard time getting off of that vicious cycle. And so what we would do is we would talk on a regular basis to try to figure out what some of the triggers were. Mm-hmm. And then the BYU Idaho has a excellent it's a rehabilitation program, kind of like an AA meeting for pornography. And we had a lot of our young men going. And there were some semesters, there were so many that I actually had to have my first counselor, Brad Nielsen, talking with some of them as well.
Help out.
Just because there were so many.
Yeah, when I was on my mission, I had the chance to do part of the 12-step program with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Also, I've sat on some meetings ever since because I find it a valuable thing. One of the concepts of the 12 steps is really just leaving everything in God's hands, admitting, I of my own self can't do this. How did you see some of those individuals who struggled with pornography overcome that through Christ?
So I actually learned this from Grandpa Clark, because he was a social worker, and he would say, ideally you want to come into a family that's on a scale of 1 to 10, a 2 maybe, on their functional level. And
that's ideal to have a 2?
If you've got a 2.
If you have a 2.
Yeah, you want to get them to 10. But really, if you can get them from a 2 to a 3, you've done some good.
I see.
And so I felt like I was in a situation where I wanted to help them get to that next level, so that eventually they could get rid of it all. It was ironic because my first Sunday as a bishop was the last Sunday of the semester. And when I went to my office, there was a lineup of young men that were confessing to pornography. And so I was there for hours after church. And the stake president, Alan Reed, he came by my office after I was done, and he started laughing at me and said, "How did you like Repentance Sunday?" And and I wasn't prepared to deal with this. So we went to Deseret Book, and Mom and I were going together, and I asked this young lady, I need all the books you have on overcoming pornography.
Yeah.
So she took me to the section, and I was asking specific questions about different aspects of pornography. And she was getting a little nervous, I think. And then Mom came up after she was done where she was and put her arm in my arm. And this young lady, probably she was freaked out because she thought it was me that was dealing with the pornography issue. And I told her, look, this isn't for me. I'm a bishop up on campus. She's like, oh, no, it's okay. I'm just glad you're finding help.
Confessing.
Yeah. So anyway, but I read all 3 of those books over the Christmas break so that I could be ready to
help
counsel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were some other focuses you had as a bishop that you kind of worked with your college students?
So I had a bishop has 5 specific responsibilities typically, and I focused on those, and I let my counselors do everything else. And we relied on the word counsel to do everything that they were asked to do, and I stayed with my responsibilities. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it because that allowed me to counsel a lot of people who were struggling with sin and other issues, and to help get them a little bit further along the path. One of the best compliments I had after we were released, Brad Nielsen, my counselor, he said, he was talking with another person he knew that was a counselor, and that person said, do you guys even do anything? Because our bishop seems to do everything. We're just there to provide support. And Brad said, actually, we run the ward because the bishop's focused on the things that he only can do.
Well, and being honest with you, sometimes I've had that perception of counselors myself, in that sometimes as a leader, when I'm in a calling, whether, when I was Elders Quorum president, sometimes you have this idea that you want to do everything because you think you know the right way. And finding counselors who are willing to put forth that effort to do the job makes a huge difference. When you can confidently delegate responsibilities and have counselors that you trust to do them, I mean, that's what you need right there.
Yeah, I think that's the only way a bishop can survive their calling, is they delegate everything. And I had 3 second counselors during my time up there, and they were all really good. So
then, being the bishop and kind of the leader of the ward, you then had a chance to become a counselor in a different role within the stake presidency.
Right.
So I remember we were out at the cabin, and this is a cabin out in Holiday Park in Utah.
Right.
Basically no service. We had been out hiking, and there's this little hub where you could get Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
And
the main reason we were connected was because of that soccer game.
Yeah, we were watching the Champions League.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to, I, being a Manchester City fan, had to make sure we were winning, which we weren't, and it was devastating. But then your phone had been connected to the Wi-Fi, and so as we were walking home from the hike, you got some texts or calls. Is that right?
So I was a little embarrassed by this, but we hung out in Salt Lake as long as we could on Friday. Because I knew they were calling a new state presidency. Oh, okay. And so I kind of felt embarrassed, like maybe they want to get a hold of me. I don't know.
You're like, I should be available, but you don't want to assume anything.
So nothing happened. So we drove up to the Holiday Park. And then that night, I was so restless. Like I couldn't sleep at all. I even walked down in the middle of the night to the caretaker's cabin to see if anything had come through.
Okay.
And it didn't. So went back to bed, and then we decided to go on that hike. And at 4 o'clock, the visiting general authority said, if he hasn't responded by then, we got to pick someone else.
Okay.
And so it was about 3 o'clock. And when we walked by the caretaker's cabin, both moms and my phone were going off like crazy.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, so I called Brett Sampson, who was on the High Council with me before, and he was also a counselor in the stake presidency with
at that time.
Yeah, with Mike Packer.
Yeah.
And I said, look, someone is trying to get a hold of me. Do you need anything? What can I help you with? And he's like, maybe you should call President Packer. So I called him, and we didn't have very good phone service there. And so we had to drive down to Oakley to actually interview with the visiting authority, which was, I believe it was, I can't even remember who it was. But
somebody.
Yeah, and on the way down, I told Mom, I said, okay, if I was going to pick the ideal circumstances for a calling that's coming, it would be for me to be a counselor to Brett Sampson. And that's what it was.
That's what it was.
Yeah, so it was really cool.
And let's see, what year was this when you got the calling? It was...
So about 3 years ago in August.
Yeah. What have been kind of some of the major experiences from your term during stake presidency that you'd like to document?
So I've learned a lot. There are a lot of professors in our stake, and they're really smart. And so I've had to learn how to approach that level of intelligence, because the level of intelligence that we're looking into is medicine.
Right.
And it's a competitive field.
Sure.
And we disagree a lot on how to handle things. In an academic setting, it's very different. And so David Pulsler, the other counselor, and I, we're about as opposite as you can be. And so as we got to know each other, we gave each other that little element of grace where, okay, I respect your opinion, but this is how I feel. Sure. And so we went through some serious conversations, he and I, and it's been wonderful because we've got to the point where we care about each other more than we care about our individual points.
Sure.
If that makes sense. And so that's been wonderful. And then what was funny, actually, in one of our first meetings as a stake presidency, President Sampson was talking about a lot of things that had to be done. Yeah. And when he said, okay, these are the things we need to do, David and I both stood up and were like, okay, we'll go do it.
Yeah. You give your thoughts and then allow the president to assimilate that information and make his choice.
Yeah, and then he said, no, you two sit down. You are to advise the leaders of these organizations. You are there to support the organizational presidencies, not to go and do it. Sure. So my responsibilities were over the young men and young women, the single adults, temple and family history, Badger Creek. I'm basically the mission president of Badger Creek, the CEO, and that was quite a experience. And then I'm over seminaries and institutes. And so it's been really, quite frankly, uplifting to work with all the leaders. See them do what they need to do.
Yeah, from a spiritual standpoint, did you have any deeply spiritual moments that would be appropriate to share?
Oh, yeah. I think most of the really spiritual experiences have come from one-on-one interviews during Temple Recommends. I've had some really incredible opportunities to... What's the right word? I have kind of an offensive personality sometimes. And all the people that I felt like I defended ended up being directly involved in my responsibilities. So I was able to meet with each one of them, kind of clear the slate, and ask for forgiveness. And now I can't think of anybody I have any issues with.
What an, great example of how God kind of puts the orchestra together, because on the one hand, it probably would have been nice to just not have to work with the people that had been offended by you. Right. Life would have carried on, probably would have all been great. But I think he knew that it'd be better for you and them in the long term to throw you into the mixing pot together and just say, figure it out.
Yeah, and that I think has been one of the choicest blessings for all that. And then we send out an email every week. We rotate responsibility. So I do an email every third week. And that's been wonderful in keeping my thoughts and attention on things that matter most.
Sure.
Because I'm always thinking, okay, what should I write about this week?
Yeah.
And so my mind is always
sorry to interrupt you, but I think when it comes to a calling or a responsibility where there's just a lot on the plate, at least for me, sometimes checking things off the to-do list gets in the way of letting the spiritual ministry happen. Right. So it sounds like those emails were a way for you to constantly keep the spiritual ministry on your mind.
Yeah, and that's been a wonderful opportunity. And then I enjoy giving talks. And part of it has been really a blessing because I have a talk that I give on how to respond when people leave the church. And Hannah actually helped me write it.
Yeah.
And so I've given that in every ward except for the Rolling Hills ward. They have people that tend to talk for 30 to 40 minutes at a time. So, but I think it's helped a lot of people. A lot of families have reached out to Mom and I because they've gotten family members that are either having issues with their sexuality or they've left the church for reasons like church history and other things like that. Mm-hmm. And it's nice because people just don't talk about that. Mm-hmm. But they realize that when I bring it up in my talk, they can talk about it. And I think it helps.
Yeah, so you were able to kind of normalize that space for people to come and talk about those difficult issues because, from a doctrinal standpoint, you can teach that and that's not going to change. But from a love standpoint and a healing standpoint, in a way, providing that space for people to have those conversations is a very healing process.
Yeah, I think so. And for individuals who are suffering like that, a lot of times they think, well, I have to go with my child and distance myself from the church. Or if I stay true to the church, I distance myself from my child.
And you say you can actually do both.
Right.
You can stay by the values you believe and also find a way to support your children. Yeah. But what's the secret? How is that done?
So, and it's nice because we've struck that delicate balance in our relationship with Hannah and Abby. They know how we feel about the gospel, but yet they also know that we love them no matter what. And so I think when families start developing a kind of coercive or manipulative sort of love, that creates problems.
So it's not a love based on the conditions of how well you think they've kept commandments.
Right. Yeah, so when your love is conditional, you don't understand love. Mm. And, the only one that has ever been able to do that unconditional love perfectly was Christ. But we try to do our very best.
Right.
So I think that has been a huge blessing during my time serving.
Yeah.
Because we've been able to facilitate lots of conversations with families.
Yeah. Well, you're currently preparing for your last talk as a member of the stake presidency. You'll be released soon from that calling as you and Mom plan for the future and are moving out to Utah to be close to the ALS clinic.
Yeah.
Talk us through a little bit about what you're hoping to convey to the members of the stake in that talk.
So my focus is going to be on what matters most. I think, so Wendy Wright I think that's her first name. She talked in General Conference about the 10 virgins and how she got the diagnosis of cancer and how with death staring in her face, she wanted to know what to do. And knowing that there's no cure for what I've got, I've been able to filter a lot of the unnecessary things out and focus on what matters most. And I think the best way to describe my thought process is, I think, putting on the armor of God and all the aspects that covers sums it up. So as we focus on those individual pieces of armor, I think that's where we find the most joy. And, sometimes Satan's the shield of faith is supposed to quench all the fiery darts, but my faith isn't perfect, so some darts get through.
Right. Yeah, we discussed this yesterday. Yeah. Sometimes you're not all prepared and something's going to hit you.
Yeah.
So part of the message you're conveying is not just that you put on the armor, but that when it inevitably breaks down, you know how to fix it and recover.
Yeah. You keep retooling your armor so you're ready.
Great. Well, I think this has been a good discussion on your experience in church service. Any other thoughts on this before we move to a new segment?
Just the fact that I think Mom and I have found the most joy in our marriage and in our lives when we've been actively involved with our ward, with our church callings. And I think it's really important to make yourself available.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, as you say that, a common attitude I see among a lot of people, specifically my age in the church, is that when you're asked to do stuff, it's a burden.
Yeah.
I think God wants us to work hard.
Yeah.
Because he knows it's going to help us. And so it's great to see your testimony of, look, we've been there, we've done it.
Yeah.
We've had the ministering callings. We've had the callings that don't necessarily seem to be helping people, but take a lot of our time. Right. But you're saying it's worth it.
Yeah. And one of my favorite moments, I think, is important to record. One of my favorite moments in a church calling was when I taught the 11 and 12-year-old boys for Sunday school. And one of the kids threw a shoe at me during the lesson. And then he decided to kind of just play around with his folding chair. And he got stuck.
Okay.
So when the chair was open, he was in pain. So when he would close it, he couldn't get out. And I just left him there. Went and found his dad and said, "Your son is stuck in a folding chair in the classroom, so you'll want to go help him out."
That's awesome.
That was one of my favorite moments.
It'll live with you forever. And I'm sure that young little man learned a valuable lesson that day.
I think so.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, we'll take a pause here. Kind of the last segment, and this is going to be pretty miscellaneous. We're probably going to talk a lot of random things, ultimately kind of ending on the legacy you've left and how you want that legacy to be lived on. But starting off, a little bit different, just documenting some of the things that have been important to you in your life. Let's talk briefly about music. Who have been, we had a culture very early on of listening to music in the home and then going to concerts.
Right.
I remember the Coldplay concert, U2 concert. For my first date, you guys even bought me tickets to go see Imagine Dragons.
Right.
And then now that's, one of my favorite hobbies. I would say my favorite concerts that we shared were Mumford & Sons right before William was born.
Yep.
I'd also have to say, for my senior trip, we went out to Italy and Germany, and we got to see One Republic live there.
Yeah.
So anyway, talk us through some of your favorite musicians and songs and kind of why they're important to you.
So I did high school in the 80s.
Right.
And that's where, Def Leppard, the Scorpions, AC/DC, Whitesnake, groups like that were very popular. And I enjoyed their music. And then when Mom and I were dating, she didn't enjoy that music at all.
Okay.
She thought it was music of the devil.
Sure.
And a song from the Scorpions came on when we were on a date, and I knew all the words. And that was the one moment in our courtship that she seriously questioned me.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she wasn't sure about me. But I felt it was important when we had you guys for you to be able to identify certain songs within the first few beats from the 80s.
Okay.
And you and Hannah were really good at it.
Nice.
So
what songs did you have us? Do we have down?
So Back in Black from AC/DC, All Night Long from AC/DC, Pour Some Sugar on Me from Def Leppard, and then some of the various other songs. But yeah, I was a product of the 80s, and now, they're obviously reaping the rewards of their horrible lifestyles, but, they still have their music that I enjoy.
Yeah, U2 was also a huge part of my upbringing.
So as I got more socially acceptable, U2 was one of my go-to albums. In fact, on my mission, we knocked on the door of somebody that was playing U2. And so our goal, the other missionaries loved U2 as well. Mm-hmm. We tried to keep them talking for the entire song.
Long enough to hear it all.
Yeah. They weren't interested, but we heard the whole song.
Yeah.
So that was good. And then, the groups that you mentioned, I love One Republic. In fact, Mom and I have kind of chosen our theme song. Mm-hmm. Good Life from One Republic. We really like that one. And then Mumford & Sons. Just, Imagine Dragons. Most of the concerts we've been to, Mom and I felt it was important for you guys to be introduced to concerts at that level. Mm-hmm. Just because they're fun.
Yeah, it's a opportunity to just have pure fun.
Yeah,
enjoy, forget the worries and
you forget everything else that's going on, and then you're just there in the moment.
Yeah,
that I don't know if you remember, but that Mumford & Sons concert, Mom and I barely made it to it.
Yeah, you had been working.
Yeah, and we got to Utah in record time, and I think the statute of limitations is passed. But the exit to get off to the stadium where the concert was under construction, and there was a huge line. And so I drove outside the cones and went past everybody to get in. So I broke a few laws.
But it was well worth it.
Yes.
For the shared memories.
Yeah, we got there right as they started.
Nice. Well, there's One Republic being one of the favorite groups. I remember just having a blast at the concert. Went to a couple from them. One of my favorite lyrics that I think I'd want to share and then transitions into another topic. I love the song I Lived. The line goes, I lived, I did it all. I owned every second that this world could give. I saw so many places, the things that I did with every broken bone. I swear I lived.
Yeah.
That's one that we've listened to a lot together. It's kind of been a theme song of mine to just really live in the moment and enjoy everything. So many places, the things that you did in your lifetime, you traveled a lot.
We did.
Tell us a little bit about the places you've been to, and what was so special about that?
So I learned not to overthink it. When we went as a family to England and Paris, Mom and I planned everything, and we didn't realize that you guys might not be able to do everything. So that was kind of our overthinking Europe trip. Then after that, we just decided to just enjoy it. And so we got, instead of us seeing everything on our own, we would hire guides that would take us. And we had some really good guides on that Prague, Vienna, and Budapest trip that we realized, okay, we have someone who knows the area, show us around and do everything. And then we'd have a couple of days to just enjoy the city.
Yeah.
And so, but Mom and I have traveled quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's been one of our hobbies. It was something we were obviously hoping to do after we retired, but
yeah,
maybe there's a way to do that in heaven.
Well, and how great is it that you prioritized investing in those experiences from the get-go?
Right.
Fortunately, you had the opportunity financially to do that.
Yeah.
But now it's kind of like, well, no regrets.
Yeah.
We did it. We saw it. What were just to list off a few? What are some of the countries you've been to?
Okay. So some of my favorites were, I loved Istanbul, and then we did Greece, Athens, Greece, on that same trip. I love Florence, Italy, when we went
That was awesome.
to Florence. We love all the Eastern Bloc European countries. We've been to Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Salzburg. We went to southern Germany just a couple of weeks ago. I've done England. We've done France probably 3 times.
Made it over to Thailand too.
Yeah, we
Cambodia.
did Thailand and Cambodia. And Cambodia was fantastic. It was a wonderful place to visit.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where Angkor Wat is. And it's just ancient ruins that are still there. It's really cool. It's like you're in a Jurassic Park movie.
Yeah. Well, I'll put it on my own bucket list.
Yeah, it's a great place.
Let's talk briefly about literature. Who have been the authors you've read the most? What books have inspired you?
So my favorite book of all time is The Divine Comedy. And I guess the reason I like that one so much is I've spent time dissecting it out. So I research all the people that he mentions.
So yeah, this is Dante
Yeah, Dante Alighieri. And there's 3 books: The Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. It talks about hell. Purgatory is the process of repenting. And then Paradiso is heaven. And no other author has gone that far into heaven in recorded history. He's the one that's really gone beyond what others have done to describe heaven. But my favorite book is the middle one. I really like that one because his concepts are actually pretty clean.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed him. I looked up all the mythology that also came with it. So it took me a while to get through it. So, and then I've got a lot of books over here.
Yeah, Dad's library is just behind the camera here.
Yeah, and I really like church philosophy. And so I read a lot of authors that are still, practicing. My friend David Pulsifer is the other counselor. He's written a couple of books, and I've read his books too. But I really enjoy that kind of stuff because it makes me think about the gospel in different ways.
Sure.
I don't necessarily agree with everything that's written.
But it allows you to kind of see people's perspectives and then kind of take what you will.
Yeah, and that has been the majority of my focus. And then we do that Audible account, and I really enjoy like historical stuff.
Yeah, lots of history.
Yeah.
Great. Well, on the topic of books and kind of transitioning into the next segment where we talk a little bit about legacy, before you kind of go into the messages you hope you've left and, you know, how you want your life to ultimately be remembered, I want to share, let me just step up a little bit, a couple things here. So you and Mom read us a lot of C.S. Lewis. Mom started that.
Right.
In the sense that we read Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, which kind of, I think, woke up my fascination as a kid for literature.
Right.
In a lot of ways, but then also had some very strong spiritual undertones. I remember then getting older into the high school phase, you recommending that I read Screw Tape Letters. Mm-hmm. And in this book, C.S. Lewis kind of gives us a situation where there's a devil coach and a devil trainee, and they're trying to figure out how to tempt us all. And I thought that was just a really interesting concept. And that's how my interest in spiritual literature was kind of born, and then ultimately came to read more works by C.S. Lewis, including, you know, Mere Christianity, The Great Divorce. And, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is, you know, William, his middle name is Lewis, and we chose C.S. Lewis because not only of the wonders that his books kind of teach and the valuable lessons, but it's such a core part of me with you and Mom, in the sense that, you know, those books have been really influential for me. So I bring that up as we transition into the legacy bit, because you have left a legacy for me that I hope to pass down of good books, in the sense that you want to instill scripture in your children. You want to instill quality literature in your children, because then that informs another bit of William's name that's really special. And I knew, of course, I'm going to get emotional. I'm fine with that. One of the stories you introduced me to was there's a movie about it, Amazing Grace, and you know, it's kind of the crossover between William Wilberforce and John Newton. And I read the biography about William Wilberforce.
Yeah, I did too. That was a good book.
It's fantastic. And one of the things that I really admired about that book, and why we went with the name William, what struck me about William Wilberforce is that not only was he able to be a great figure for his time and bring about a lot of social change and push forward good values, his home life was not in shambles. And a lot of times you'll look at these historical figures and you'll see the great things they've done, but they weren't that great at home. You know, they didn't do a whole lot of good other than what they're remembered for. William Wilberforce, to his children, wrote letters constantly. He was sending them messages, instilling his fatherhood wisdom. And I brought these, I mean, what a prized possession. These are all letters that you wrote to me while I was on my mission. I think there's something like 48 of them right here. You know, and to me, it's what we've already talked about. It's the legacy of intentional fatherhood. You know, and having these lessons written down is great. And I don't want to say that the lessons in them and the words are secondary, but primary is, I knew that Dad cared. And you taught me that caring and investing that time in your children allows them to have really the wings to fly, the courage and confidence to know that somebody's got their back if they fall. And so, as a father myself, I hope to emulate that with William, Eleanor, and hopefully the more kids we bring. So, anyway, apologies for the tears. Actually, No, I'm not sorry for the tears. It's a deeply meaningful thing to me. So thank you.
The reason we did this is because you didn't have time to read the emails.
Yeah.
Because they were so long.
They were long. And,
we call them dad epistles.
Yep. And so, William Wilberforce, having done that, really reminded me of you in the sense that I felt like you had an excellent professional life, but you also took care of things at home. And that's something I really admired. And, I see a lot of you and William. And, I think probably, hopefully you have longer with us. But of the grandchildren that remember having memories with you, he may be it. And I think he will do an excellent job of carrying forth that legacy as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll be good. Yeah. He's just, that's the thing that I'm frustrated with the most, is that I'll be able to watch over my grandkids, but I want to be there physically. Yeah. And that's the challenge, but yeah.
Well, when you think of legacy and how you hope to have left your mark on this world, what comes to mind?
So, one of the themes that I've focused on in my life is the 2 great commandments. And I think everything that I want my children and grandchildren to understand comes from those 2 commandments. Loving God, and by that I mean being obedient to his commandments, learning as much as we can about him and our Savior Jesus Christ through the scriptures, through modern day prophets. We don't have Christ among us. And so we have to rely on what is written and what is spoken by our imperfect leaders. Mm-hmm. And being able to read and listen to those imperfect leaders and be able to filter out the things that annoy you about those individuals and focus on what is meant from the doctrine, I think is really critical for people to understand. And then I think also serving in the church is a branch between both of those 2 great commandments, because we serve because we love God, but we also serve because we love our neighbor as well. And I haven't always been perfect at this, because sometimes I'll have issues with people and it gets me frustrated. Mom and I go on a lot of walks so that I can discuss my frustrations with her. I actually think God lets us have those conversations. Oh,
he kind of puts the mute button, right? So
he goes and gets something to eat. Yeah, and so, I have to work through things, but as, my end is kind of staring me in the face, I realize that those things are really not that necessary. Like, I used to listen to a political podcast all the time, and I've canceled my membership because it's not important anymore. All the controversy doesn't really ring true to me anymore. I want to be able to love people no matter what their thoughts are. So, I think when it comes to my legacy, I want my children and grandchildren to know that I love God. And because I love God, he teaches me how to love my neighbor. I think Elder Holland said it. He said, as we learn to love God, we will be able to find ways to love our neighbor. And so that's why that's the first great commandment, because he teaches you how to love other people, even when you disagree. Yeah. And that's a unique balance to strike, being able to disagree and still love someone else. Yeah. I think it's critical.
For sure. Well, I appreciate you sitting down with me for these couple hours to talk about all these things. My hope with this is that people who know you and love you will be able to pull this up and be able to still continue to derive wisdom from the life you've lived.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. It's been good to get this all on tape.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One last lyric from Mumford & Sons I wanted to share because I think it's, relevant and I think somewhat of a tribute to how I view you. And here come the waterworks again, but I don't even know if I can get through it. But in Awake My Soul, they sing, in these bodies we will live, in these bodies we will die, but where you invest your love, you invest your life. And you've invested your love in good things, Dad. You really have. And I hate to say it because, people ask me my thoughts on this, and I hate to say it because I don't want you to go anytime soon. But the last words, are true. It says, "Awake my soul, for you were made to meet your maker." And you were. No, I don't know the ins and outs of all your choices, and Christ is the judge.
Yeah.
But in my eyes, and why I hate to say it, is I can't think of very many other people who are more prepared to meet their maker than you.
Yeah. I've talked with Mom about this. I feel ready to meet him. But like that song Tides, Ed Sheeran.
Yeah.
There's just so many things I want to do still.
Yeah.
But that won't happen. So, but I do feel ready. I've been able to kind of unload a lot of the burdens that I've carried because I know how to unload them. And that's through Jesus. And that's the only way to find true peace.
Yep.
In my opinion. So.
Well, and I think it just goes to show with all of this that there's still more to be learned. There's a great beyond out there and so many questions that won't be answered. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens, right?
Yeah. I'm really excited about the increased knowledge that supposedly comes when you pass away.
Yep.
So that would be nice.
Well, thank you so much for your roles. Thanks for being a son, a brother, a dad, a grandpa, a husband.
Right.
At the end of the day.
And those are my favorite roles.
Yeah.
Yep.
Alrighty. Well, I think we'll end there, but before we stop, I need a hug and we'll call it good.
Sounds good.